How now, brown cow? How now, brown cow? How now, brown cow? Check, check. Check 1, 2, check, check. Check 1, 2. How now, brown cow? Let's go, boys and girls. It's live. Check, check. Check 1, 2. Hello, everybody. Welcome to our workshop. We're going to be covering everything related to the missing piece in high altitude preparation. Welcome, everybody. I'm Anthony LaRubio. I am from Recal Training. I'll introduce myself more here in just a bit, but just to kick things off, and I've already kicked it off in the chat, as you'll see there at the bottom, either to the side if you're on your computer or below if you're on mobile. I would love to hear from you to begin. What's your name, where you're calling from, and if you have an upcoming expedition, I would love to hear those details here in the chat. You can drop any questions that you have as we go through our workshop here. Throw them, any question when it comes to mind, just throw it up into the chat. I'll be monitoring that as we go, obviously, and I'll work that into our conversation. There will be time at the very end for Q&A as well, though. So yeah, hey everybody. I'm Anthony, obviously. I am calling in from Italy, where it is extremely hot right now. And I'm in an Airbnb that's the top floor attic with no air conditioning. So if I start sweating through this shirt, please have some grace with me. We're going to work through that just like we work through high altitude climbs. My goal is next month, I actually plan, if the stars align and things go well, I plan on climbing Kilimanjaro. So, I just started things off. I would love to hear from you all as well in the chat. Again, go ahead and start typing, send it up. You'll have to put in your name, and then we can get the chat going. So I'll be monitoring that as we go. Everybody, again, as I said at the very beginning, I'll introduce myself more here in just a bit. But in short, what I do is I effectively help people climb high altitude mountains. And in my years of experience in doing this type of work, there's something major that I began to notice, was that they were leaving out this incredibly important part of their preparation. This thing that we'll get into here in just a bit has the chance of increasing your chances of success by 2 times in some cases on some particular mountains, Aconcagua, for example. So this is an incredibly important thing. And so in the next 45 minutes or so, I want to share with you everything about this missing piece, how you can actually apply it to your own preparation and do it for little to no cost. So let's begin here. Hey, Michael, welcome. Happy to see you here from Germany. Hey, Jana, I know we spoke actually just a little bit. I'm really excited about your particular climb. I think you said that you were going to, as you said, not Everest big, but you're still going to be doing some pretty high passes. So that's super exciting in Bhutan. Joe, hey, Joe, welcome in. Glad that you're here. So yeah, I'll let the chat continue to trickle in as folks get acquainted there. So let's get started. I want to identify, by the way, my dog is in the room. I don't know if you can see her here. If she jumps in or jumps on me and I have to get distracted for a second, please, again, have grace with me. Let's establish first who this workshop is really for. So if you have a high altitude climb coming up, if you are training for an expedition right now, if you are following a plan and that plan has some endurance, strength training, maybe hypoxic training, etc. If you are a guide or a fitness coach with clients going on an expedition soon, or if you've struggled on a past expedition, then you're in the right place. But also, if you have a fear of, say, for example, falling behind or holding your team back, your expedition team back, if you've got a fear of getting altitude sickness on the mountain, if you have a fear of having to turn around or worse, be taken down by helicopter, if any of these things sound like you, then you're in the right place. Because if I do my job, by the end of this workshop, I'm going to hopefully empower you to understand what this missing piece is in high altitude preparation and how it has the power to determine who reaches the summit and who spirals. I also want to help you learn how to integrate this into your schedule so that you can keep pace with your team, so that you can stay healthy on the mountain, so that you can feel less out of breath, therefore enjoy your climb more if you're not just gasping for air the entire time. And ultimately, if this is your goal, you reach your summit, you make it over your pass, you make it to your destination and your trek and all of those things. Hey, Beth. All right, getting ready to train and go to Colorado. That's awesome. You're from Washington. Hello. Angela, also Washington. We got a ton of people from Washington State. That's super fun. Rainier in 1.5 weeks. All right, I'm not sure how much we can really get done in 1.5 weeks, but I'll give you some really quick tips, Angela, on at least some quick things that you can do with your breathing habits and change. But I don't think we can do a full-blown training, obviously. And yeah, Lauren, hey, great to see you. I'm glad that you made it in and you're doing the John Muir Trail. Luna, no. My dog is trying to get my attention right now. This is super fun. So I have a question for you to begin. Have you struggled at altitude before? Yes, you can drop that into the chat. Actually, it seems like Joe, as a teenager, was struck with some mountain sickness. So obviously, Joe, you have. Yeah, throw up your story into the chat. I would love to hear from you there. I have one key message to deliver about this concept of have you struggled at altitude before? And that is that if you have, it is not your fault. The problem was not you. It was not maybe your effort in your training or your acclimatization program. It was simply what most training plans leave out of their preparation. Because here's what most climbers end up doing before a high altitude trek or a climb, etc. I call this the preparation pie. Most climbers, they download a training plan or they hire a coach. They'll do some aerobic training, some muscular endurance training, some strength training in general, maybe even, especially for those that live at sea level. And I know we've got a lot of people from Washington in here near or at sea level. You might get a hypoxic tent. You rent one of those, buy one of those, etc., and get some hypoxic exposure. And then you ultimately end up hoping that your acclimatization schedule, the time that you have planned on the mountain, is going to be adequate. Hope is not a strategy, as a wise person once said. Well, that preparation pie ends up looking something like this, as you can see here. The aerobic training, the strength training, the muscular endurance training, maybe that hypoxic tent, but looking not all that closely, you see this gaping hole right here. This, my friends, is the missing piece in the preparation for a high altitude expedition. Now, what does that type of preparation result in on the mountain? Let's look at Kilimanjaro for a second, the mountain that I'm going to attempt to climb next month. Did you know that only 65% of the people actually end up making to the top of Kilimanjaro? And that's mainly one of the primary reasons why somebody doesn't make it is due to problems physiologically with the altitude. Denali, chances of success are 52%. Those of you maybe some point on the horizon looking at climbing Aconcagua, chances of success are pretty low on that one, 35%. However, what if I was to tell you that in the last 2 climbing seasons, in our work with one of the biggest guiding companies down there at Aconcagua, we went from a 35% success rate to 71%, just simply by addressing this missing piece in preparation. So it obviously begs us to answer the question of, what the heck is this missing piece? That missing piece, maybe no surprise for some of you, is breath work training. Now, you might be wondering, all right, Anthony, what in the world is breathwork training? Well, hold on. I'm going to break down everything that I can in the next 30 to 40 minutes or so about breathwork training and what it is and how you can implement it. But just take 1 second here and simply ask yourself, when was the last time that you thought about your breathing? That you actually consciously brought some awareness to how it is that you're breathing? Well, and I'm not talking about the moment that you are struggling for air in that zone 3 or 4 hill repeats workout, just simply every day, course of business, while training. When was the last time you really thought about your breathing? So let's do a little self-check, shall we? We're going to do a couple of little mini tests on your breathing to see where you stand today. So from a seated position, I want you to go ahead and join me in doing this little self-assessment. For the next 30 seconds, I want you to look down the front of your body. You can put your hands on your body just like I have in the picture and simply count the number of breaths that you take in the next 30 seconds. I'm going to start the timer now. Just simply breathe as normally as possible and count the number of breaths that you take. We're halfway through the 30 seconds. You've got about 5 seconds left. And go ahead and stop. Now, keep that number in mind. Still look down the front of your body and observe where the movement happens when you breathe. Do you notice it up in your shoulders? Is there movement happening up and down in your shoulders? Do you notice the movement happening maybe in the middle of your chest? Again, you're just observing how you're breathing. Does the movement happen in the middle of your rib cage? Or do you notice it in your lower belly? Okay, so just take a note to yourself. I'm going to start a poll right now. I want to hear from you. What was, basically, take the 30 seconds number of breaths you took, double that. Okay, and we're going to get a 1 minute respiratory rate. So again, take the number that you had from that 30 seconds, double that number times 2, and then answer that poll. I see some of you coming in at 7 to 10. I see some of you at 11 to 14. I'm going to let the poll run for a little bit longer. Quite a few, 7 to 10 range. We got another 11 to 14. We got a 15 to 18 again. 3, 2, 1. I will give some people last chance to answer. Okay, I'm closing that poll. Looks like we finished with one of you, 15 to 18 breaths per minute for a 1 minute respiratory rate. A lot of you were 11 to 14. And then quite a few also 7 to 10. Now, second poll here. Where was the location of movement? Was it up in your shoulders? Was it in the middle of your chest? Was it in the middle of your ribs? Or was it in your lower belly? We've got 2 people so far with the lower belly. One of you in the chest. Same ratio here, about double the amount of people lower belly versus chest here. Middle of ribs, we've got nobody in the shoulders. Hint, hint, that's probably a good thing that we don't have a lot of movement in the shoulders. I'm going to close the poll in just 3 seconds, 2 and 1. So we ended up with 55% in the lower belly, 27% in the chest, and 18% middle of the ribs. So what we just did were 2 very important little self-assessments around your own breathing. The 1-minute respiratory rate, how many breaths we take per minute, and then the location of movement, which identifies the mechanics of your breathing. Do you want to know what is most optimal here? The answer for now is stay until the end. I am going to cover that in some later portions of our workshop, okay? But let's talk about the ground that I'm going to cover in total today over the time that we are going to be together. I'm going to discuss with you these 3 breakthroughs that I've discovered in my coaching with clients that have completely changed the way that people address preparation for high altitude. Then, beyond the 3 breakthroughs, we're going to talk about why it is that fit climbers still fail at altitude, how to make altitude adaptations and do it from any elevation, whether or not you live at sea level or up in the mountains somewhere, and without adding more time to your busy life. Then we're going to talk about 2 key predictors, physiological markers in the body that can predict altitude sickness. We'll talk about 2 breathing exercises. We'll actually do some breathing exercises and another assessment. And then we'll talk about how to integrate all of this into your schedule. So without further ado, we're going to dive right into the 3 breakthroughs. Breakthrough number 1, simply put, altitude is not a fitness problem. It is an oxygen delivery problem. This is super, super key, important. There's a big distinction between something being a fitness problem versus an oxygen delivery problem. And the real problem is that most standard training models do not address this oxygen delivery problem. Now, breakthrough number 2 is that you can train for altitude and you can do it from any elevation, and a hypoxic tent alone doesn't solve the core problem of oxygen delivery. And then that breakthrough number 3 is that breathwork training can increase the return on investment that you make of all of the training that you're already doing. And it can fit nicely inside your current training plan, your current daily life, without adding more time. So I will break down each of these 3 breakthroughs in more detail. We're going to go one by one through that. But before I dive into that, I just want to share with you real quickly how it is that I discovered these breakthroughs, this particular world of breathwork training for high altitude performance. And simply put, while going through a few breathwork training certifications, I read some research that I thought was pretty unbelievable. Maybe the skeptic inside me kind of like doubted some of these things. The research said that by doing simple breathing exercises, you could make hypoxic adaptations in your body from any elevation. You could improve your lung capacity. You could keep your blood oxygen saturation levels high at altitude. You could delay the onset of muscle fatigue, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And like I said, I just didn't believe any of those things. And that's really where this journey of mine began. Because really, realistically, I'm not a mountaineer. I'm not an endurance athlete. I don't have some impressive resume of a bunch of mountains that I'm tagging. If I make it to the top of Kilimanjaro, it will still be the highest point that I've made in my life. I thought that simply after checking off some of these standard boxes, your performance at altitude was then just going to be simply based on having great fitness, having a good acclimatization schedule, having adequate hydration, nutrition, iron levels, etc. And then from then on, it was just going to be dumb luck based on your genetics, based on your pre-exposure to altitude, and ultimately just a very individual response. However, that bit of research that I read, that stuck with me, okay? And so what I did was I decided I was going to test this stuff out, okay? And I created 2 experiments, all right? The first one was something called the nasal marathon. The second one was something called sea level to 14er. Nasal marathon, very simply, I signed up to run a full marathon, actually the Seattle Marathon. And instead of training for my marathon by running, I trained, in quotes, by only doing breathwork training. And then when I went to run the marathon, I taped my mouth shut and I ran the whole thing with my mouth shut, breathing entirely through my nose. And this was the first moment that, my friends, I'm telling you, I started to realize, oh, wow, there is something really special about this breathwork training thing. Okay. Then I decided to take the stakes up a notch and go from sea level to a 14,000 foot peak in Colorado. And again, I climbed that mountain with my mouth taped shut directly from sea level after having no experience at altitude before that point in my life. And that was when I was like, all right, there's really something here. I'm on to something. Bring on all the mountains in the world. And then I created a third experiment. And that experiment is something I called the failure at Orizaba. If you're familiar with Pico de Orizaba in Mexico, it's a 5,400 or so meter peak, extremely high. It's the third highest point in North America. And yeah, that one didn't go so well. However, the key distinction between my first two experiments and this one was that I didn't just do it alone. I actually roped somebody else into this experiment, and it did not go well. Now, here's setting the scene here. As you can see, this is our mini little camp at about 5,000 meters, which in feet, I don't know, that's 16,000 and some change feet. Our guide is in a green jacket. He's looking fine. Raimundo down in Mexico, he's done this climb 75 plus times. He's doing just fine. But if you look more closely, you'll see someone in a black jacket, hunched backwards on a backpack. That is my now wife, Monica. She's the one that I roped into doing this. She is not doing well. And thank God she still ended up becoming my wife after putting her through that. But the point is, that failure at Orizaba changed my approach because I recognized that what I was really doing was simply a bunch of hacks. I took those protocols from the research, hacked them together, and I decided, oh, yeah, I can do a lot of things at altitude with that, but absolutely not. So my epiphany was that what it takes to summit a high altitude mountain is not a bunch of hacks. It is a training system, something that has a beginning, middle, and end. It's a progressive system, making progressions along the way. So what I did was I began building a system, and I started to share pieces of that system with other people. And that is when they took it to heights that I never could have imagined. Let me share with you one example of those people. Meet Umar Latif. Umar lives and trains at about 600 feet above sea level. He said that after doing the breathwork training at that 600 feet, he saw an immediate improvement in his breathing. And then on the mountain, and his goal, by the way, was specifically he wanted to climb a 6,000 meter peak, over 19,000 feet, called Kosar Gang in the Karakoram mountain range in Pakistan. He said that on the mountain, he was able to keep his blood oxygen saturation levels high, just like the research had showed, right? This is Umar right here at 6,000 meters. But one of the most important things to call out here is that Umar did this after doing the training. He climbed that mountain in just 4 days. Now, I am a huge proponent of a good, long, proper acclimatization period, okay? I don't look at breathwork training as some hack to get you up the mountain faster. In fact, when I do Kili, I am doing an 8 to 9 day trip. Like I am doing it the full acclimatization process. But I'm calling out Umar's story because it's quite incredible. In fact, it got featured in adventure.com. It was so incredible what he did with the breathwork training and then going up in just 4 days. So as you can see, like I said before, others that I shared this early versions of the training system with took it to heights that I never could have imagined. So let's talk in depth about these 3 breakthroughs that I mentioned at the beginning. Breakthrough number 1, again, is that altitude is not a fitness problem. It is an oxygen delivery problem. And that standard training model that most people go through before a climb doesn't directly address this oxygen delivery issue. So in my years of training people that are signed up for expeditions, I've been privileged enough for them to be able to share some of the fears that they have around their climb with me. And the single thing that I hear more than any other of their fear in advance of a climb is that they don't want to be the liability in their group. They don't want to be the reason that their expedition team doesn't reach the summit or that other plans and accommodations need to be made, right? But there's a really unfortunate false belief around this fear, and that is that people believe simply, if I'm fit enough, I'm going to be fine on the mountain. But the actual truth is that even the fittest climbers can get helicoptered off the mountain because, again, altitude is not a fitness problem, it's an oxygen delivery problem. The truth is that it is not going to be your legs that fail first on the mountain. The thing that fails first is your breathing. And when your breathing fails, everything else spirals out of control from your breathing. I actually call this specifically the hypoxic spiral. So let's break down what exactly this hypoxic spiral really is, right? The first step, of course, is that as you climb higher and higher, the barometric pressure, in other words, the air pressure around you, begins to drop because you're getting higher and higher above sea level. When the barometric pressure drops, there's less oxygen molecules in the air around you, and your breathing destabilizes. It can become very erratic. It can become very heightened. And when that happens, your heart rate begins to spike and also become very erratic. And when your heart rate spikes, everything else kind of is on this roller coaster ride, and things like panic and doubt and stress start to set into your mind because there's this tight connection between your breathing, your heart rate, and your mental state, your stress levels in the body. And when that stress level goes up, energy drains more quickly from your body, and you begin to slow down after a period of time, all the way until, if you're all the way down this hypoxic spiral, you end up stopping. But there's this misconception around that hypoxic spiral, and that is, again, people believe if they're fit, they're going to be invincible to this hypoxic spiral. But let me share a story. Let me introduce you to Dave. Dave Taylor, he's a retired member of our United States military, specifically as an Army Ranger. So as you can imagine, Dave has done some incredibly physically challenging things in his life. He's done a whole lot of training in his life. And one of these challenges that he signed himself up for was to climb Aconcagua back in 2023. Dave trained hard, got in really good shape. However, he failed in his first attempt at Aconcagua. He turned around at about 6,000 meters. He said that breathing is something that we take for granted until we can't. And in my first attempt at Aconcagua, I struggled to breathe. That triggered panic. I felt like I was drowning standing up. So that was Dave's first attempt. Now, Dave, foolishly, bravely, however we want to look at it, decided he was going to go in for a second attempt. However, this time he was going to fix that missing piece of the puzzle. He added breathwork training to his plan. He started doing this about 2 months before his departure, just to give you an idea on his timing. A lot of people can start with 6 months beforehand. It's kind of dependent on your timing and schedule. This is Dave and I working together before that second attempt. He's got a sports mask on, which is a key piece of equipment that we actually do use. And after doing the training, he successfully summited. He lived and worked and trained in Maryland, United States. As you can imagine, not much altitude there. And he made it to the top of Aconcagua. He said that his experience was night and day between the first attempt and the second attempt, thanks to the breathwork training. He could feel the difference. But on the mountain, between the altitude, physical exhaustion, things could have easily spiraled out of control. As I mentioned, that hypoxic spiral, etc., etc. I can let you read that, obviously. The point is that Dave, first attempt versus second attempt, clear difference between fixing that missing piece and adding breathwork training to his preparation plan. Now, there's one more misconception I want to bring up here about avoiding that hypoxic spiral. That is that a lot of people believe that if I'm just simply young, I'll be fine. I won't get into that hypoxic spiral. And that is not the case. I have seen plenty of 30-year-olds fall into this spiral, and I've seen plenty of 60-plus-year-olds, 70-year-olds avoid it completely. Let's talk about one of those 60-year-olds, Nigel Henry. Nigel lived and trained in London, near sea level, obviously. He was training for an Everest base camp trek. And this is what he had to say. Without a doubt, the breathwork training helped immensely to prepare. When he was short of breath on his trek, The techniques that we had worked on together helped him to massively improve his oxygen levels at altitude. So as you can see, he avoided that hypoxic spiral even at age 60. Now, there's one more misconception here that a lot of people have about altitude. And that is that, again, being young and being fit guarantees your summit. That is not the case. The last misconception, excuse me, I meant to put those two things first. There's one more misconception now, and that is that to avoid the hypoxic spiral, a lot of people believe that you need to pre-expose your body to hypoxia using an altitude simulation tent or even traveling in advance of your climb to get that exposure. Don't get me wrong, these are elements of a good preparation plan, but they are not things that are going to guarantee that you avoid that hypoxic spiral. That brings us to breakthrough number 2. You can train for altitude from any elevation, and that hypoxic tent alone does not solve that core oxygen delivery problem. So let's break this down. The truth is that pre-exposure to hypoxia is not the entire story, because where hypoxic tents actually fall short has to do with the difference between passive exposure to this simulated hypoxia versus actively training the systems that are going to be stressed at altitude. The systems like your breathing, your diaphragm, your intercostal muscles, all the way down to the cellular level of getting oxygen into the tissues, carbon dioxide out of the blood and out of the body. So the reframe of all of this is that where you live in relation to high altitude is not your limiter. What is your limiter is something called your ventilatory response. So let's break down what exactly is this ventilatory response. HVR for short, hypoxic ventilatory response. In effect, it is how efficiently your body increases its breathing when the oxygen level drops at altitude. And that difference between those that increase their breathing at altitude versus those that don't is often the difference between someone who stabilizes at altitude and somebody who hits that spiral, right? Let me share with you an example to illustrate this point much better. And that is with 2 climbers on the same mountain with a different outcome. Meet Matt, 25-year-old, meet Julie, our 65-year-old. They're both on the same exact trek of Kilimanjaro. Now, remember I mentioned in our agenda that I was going to share with you these 2 key indicators that can predict who comes down with altitude sickness? One of those key indicators is not age, as we actually just talked about. One of those indicators is not gender either. It is not your fitness level. The first key indicator is this thing called ventilatory response. And the second key indicator is blood oxygen saturation levels. And those things are intricately connected. Because these key indicators have the power, based on research, they were able to predict altitude sickness with a 90% accuracy level. So what's happening here really? Somebody who has a weak ventilatory response, aka their breathing does not increase as much as those in somebody who did, that's a smaller increase in the minute ventilation, how much oxygen we get in and out of our body with each and every breath. That will then lead to that bigger drop in oxygen saturation levels. That will then lead to that higher likelihood of altitude sickness. But it all begins with that weak ventilatory response. So let's come back to our climbers, okay? We've got Matt, we've got Julie. We've got one climber that had strong ventilation at altitude and therefore subsequently a stable SpO2. And then we had another climber with weak ventilation, and that person had a big drop in their SpO2. You want to take a guess? Who's who in this situation? Matt, fit, young, 25-year-old. Julie, 65 years old. Which is which here? Julie was the one that had strong ventilation and stable SpO2. Matt was the one that had weak ventilation, therefore a big drop in SpO2. And guess who summited, my friends? Julie. Julie and her strong ventilatory response. The key message that I want to deliver around this point, this second breakthrough about this ventilatory response, is that it's not fixed, okay? you can train your ventilatory response. You can build a strong ventilatory response. It's going to respond well at altitude. It will then lead to better oxygenation, and ultimately, hopefully, you reach your summit with this strong ventilatory response. But the question is, how exactly do we train this? Enter respiratory muscle training. Let's do some respiratory muscle training together, okay? This is going to be that exercise, one of a couple different exercises I mentioned we're going to do. Just like my picture shows here, I want you to simply put your hands on the front of your belly, and through your nose, I want you to take 5 deep, full, and fast inhales through your nose. You can exhale through your mouth or your nose, whatever's comfortable. Go for 2 more. 1 more. Now block 1 nostril. Do the same thing, 5 breaths. It's a lot harder, isn't it? Okay, continue on for 4 more breaths. Switch the nostrils if you want. Do 1 more breath with me. Go ahead and relax. Did you notice how much harder it was, obviously, when you block 50% of your airway? That, my friends, is respiratory muscle training. Specifically, you're training your inspiratory muscles, your diaphragm and your intercostal muscles. Those are the muscles that can drive a good ventilatory response at altitude. And doing a lot of respiratory muscle training is going to help immensely. The research has shown it helps immensely when you are at high altitude dealing with that low air pressure there. So don't leave your hypoxia-ventilatory response to chance. Make sure that you have the respiratory muscle endurance to take on the challenge of breathing stronger at altitude. Now, most climbers, though, even after hearing these 2 breakthroughs, they make one final mistake. We've covered a lot of breakthroughs here already. You know, you've seen what Umar did in his 6,000 meter peak in 4 days. You've seen Dave and his second attempt at Aconcagua, and that he avoided that hypoxic spiral that he had experienced that first time. You've seen now what Nigel did in his Everest Base Camp trek at 60 years old. You've seen what Julie did with her strong ventilatory response at altitude. Maybe you've come around to this idea that, all right, this breathwork training stuff, it really can make a big difference, but I want to get real about the situation that I know that you're in, especially if you're somebody with a climb coming up. You know, it's not like your life just hit the pause button because you put an expedition on your calendar, right? You're busy. You might already have a fitness training plan that you're working through and might be barely hanging on to maintaining that training plan. So how in the world could you actually add one more thing to your life? And if that's you, I completely understand. And that is actually why it's so important for us to cover breakthrough number 3, which again is that breathwork training increases the return on investment of the training that you're already doing. And it has the power to fit nicely inside your current plan, inside your current life and schedule, while not adding more time to it. So let's break down what exactly that really means here. The standalone work of breathwork training is basically 10 to 15 minutes per day, 3 days a week. Now I know what you're thinking. Anthony, you literally just told me it's going to add no more time to my life. Let me break this down in a bit more detail. Stick with me here. There's a separate part of breathwork training called the integrated work. This can be done as your warm-up before other training, your cool down, or maybe more importantly, it can be done in tandem with, at the same time as your other training that you're doing. But the point is that doing breathwork training is going to be the time that you're investing in breathwork training is going to be offset by the efficiency that it creates, by the return on investment that it's going to create for you doing that training. Think about it. If you breathe better, you're going to get more out of your existing training. To illustrate this point, let me introduce you to Josh Blesnak. He's a long distance trail runner, originally from Alaska, but he lives at sea level. He was training for an ultra marathon at high altitude. We got introduced, we started working together, and he said that while he was training, the biggest thing that he noticed was his ability to increase his running pace while staying in heart rate zone 2. If you're familiar with heart rate zones, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, zone 2 is kind of that threshold just beneath your aerobic threshold. It's where a lot of endurance athletes want to train. Well, when he went to run his ultramarathon, which specifically was the Leadville 100 in Colorado, he said that he noticed again these improvements in his hill climb times in doing his breathwork training and his ability to catch his breath after a steep, fast climb. I believe there's a lot to gain from the training, et cetera, et cetera. The point is that he was able to increase the pace that he was running while staying in heart rate zone 2. He obviously is an experienced runner, knows exactly what pace he typically runs in zone 2, and he got more distance, more hills, etc., out of that existing training by doing the breathwork training. This I call the multiplication effect of breathwork training, because integrating breathwork training into your program multiplies the results of all of your other training. So let's break down how exactly it has the power to do that. Example number 1 of this is simply fixing bad breathing habits. If you can identify and fix your bad breathing habits, then you're going to get more performance from your existing training. So let's break down what are the 3 most common bad breathing habits that I have seen in my years of being a breathwork training coach. The first breathing habit that I see more than any other is upper chest breathing. So for those of you, I don't remember what our polls came out. 27% of you and really another 18% had either ribs or chest breathing, upper chest breathing. This is the number 1 most common bad breathing habit that I see. Secondly is over breathing. How do we define over breathing? It's just basically breathing too many times in 1 minute. So remember that 1 minute respiratory rate, right? None of you were in that 6 or less range. That is actually the most optimal respiratory rate in 1 minute while at rest, which we all were at rest for that. Anything above that is actually over breathing, which is not doing your body a service. Most people fall in that like 14, 15 to 18, 19 range breaths per minute. And the most optimal is 6. It's really pretty incredible, isn't it? The last most common bad breathing habit is mouth breathing, not breathing through your nose, okay? You can actually take an assessment for free at assessment.recal.training. I don't know that QR code showing up, it's fine. We're going to do actually one of the assessments that are in this 5-part assessment of the Recal Breath Index assessment, and that is called the carbon dioxide tolerance test. So basically how this works is from a seated position, we're going to take a really deep breath in, and then we're going to try to exhale as slow as humanly possible, and then try to extend that exhale as long as you possibly can, okay? You try to extend that exhale as long as you can, and the time that's going to be on the screen when I start my timer is going to be your personal carbon dioxide tolerance test, okay? So I'm going to share the timer on the screen now. Join me, if you'd like, from a seated position. Let's take one normal breath in through your nose. And then let's take a normal breath out. And now begin a really big breath, like a full breath, as full as you possibly can. Fill up, fill up, fill up. And with your mouth closed, now begin that very slow breath, like the air is just leaking out of your nose. And again, you're trying to extend this exhale as long as you possibly can. And when you get to the point that you squeeze every last bit of air out of your lungs, that time that's on the screen is going to be your personal carbon dioxide tolerance test. If you're done, you can go ahead and answer our poll, which is what was your CO2 TT time? I'll let the timer run for a little while longer. I see some of you already done it in that 30 to 45 second range. Again, the CO2 TT is in seconds. Okay, we had some two. We've got 40% was in that below 30 range. I'll let the timer run for just like 5 more seconds. If you are still going, that's awesome. And I will stop the timer there. I'll let the poll run for just a little bit longer here, but I'm looking at it and it looks like the vast majority of you were in that 30 to 45 second range. Quite a few of you were below 30, quite a few 46 to 60. Looks like we've got one very special person at 61 to 75 seconds. And I'll close that poll in 3, 2, 1, closing that poll. Okay, so most of you were 30 to 45 or 45 to 60, okay? This again is called that carbon dioxide tolerance test. Let's talk about why it is that this is important. And I'll kind of break this down, and I'll also share with you my thoughts on what range I would really like to see you at it, depending on what you're trying to do up at altitude. So we're going to get into the CO2, what exactly that really means. And it has to do with this integrated approach to our training, okay? Here we go. We're back to this wonderful mask. The sports mask is what it's called. There's a real benefit to wearing one of these things and actually using it while doing your other training. Again, talk about time efficiency. If you're going to be on the treadmill, you're going to be on the Stairmaster, you're going to be doing some hills and all that sort of stuff. Wearing something like this, you're going to get a lot more out of that training. And I know you might be wondering, Anthony, the last thing in the world that I am going to do is be seen wearing this Darth Vader looking thing on my face. And if that's you, I totally get it. I'm going to try to convince you why you should not care what people think and you should actually wear this thing. And the first thing has to do with the air resistance that comes with the mask. You are effectively doing respiratory muscle training by simply wearing that mask because it's going to resist the air that you breathe in. You're going to be training those intercostal muscles in the rib cage, training the diaphragm muscle right beneath your lungs. That's critically important at high altitude by wearing the mask. The second thing, though, is that you are getting what I call out of breath training. You're training your carbon dioxide tolerance because most people don't realize this, but the primary stimulus for that feeling of breathlessness, that feeling like I'm out of breath, is not a lack of oxygen. It actually is the presence and the rising presence of carbon dioxide in the blood. What happens when we move our body to produce that energy to move the body? Carbon dioxide is a byproduct of the metabolic processes there. Carbon dioxide rises in the blood when we're moving faster and faster. For example, trekking, and especially at high altitude. In fact, it becomes higher and higher. By using this mask, you have to rebreathe your recently exhaled carbon dioxide. And so you're effectively training that tolerance that you have to carbon dioxide, and you're getting that out of breath training. So all of this is to say, it has everything to do with this multiplication effect. Think a faster pace, running pace in your zone 2, or hiking pace, trekking, going upstairs, etc. Think more distance covered on your hill repeats workout. Think more reps in your muscular endurance training for your legs, all by breathing better, addressing these common bad breathing habits, and getting more out of the existing time that you spend training. That is what breathwork training can do for you. So let's recap these 3 breakthroughs. Again, altitude is not a fitness problem, it's an oxygen delivery problem. You can train for altitude and do it from any elevation. And lastly, breathwork training increases the return on investment of the training that you're already doing. But there's a cost of ignoring this missing piece, the thing that a lot of people ignore from their preparation plan for an expedition, the breathwork training. So you have a fork in the road, right? Especially if you have an expedition coming up. You've got 2 types of climbers that you could be. You could be Julie with a well-trained ventilatory response and a stable SpO2 at high altitude, or Matt, weak ventilatory response and a big drop in your oxygen saturation levels. So my challenge to you is that you invest your time, money, etc., in what actually matters in advance of your trip, trek, climb, etc. You have trained way too hard for this thing. Don't do what most climbers do. And that's simply the aerobic training, the strength training, the muscular endurance training, but they leave that little box right there. They leave that out. Doing that type of preparation results in scores like these: 65% at Kilimanjaro, 52% success at Denali, 35% at Aconcagua. Instead, I encourage you to address that missing piece. Fill it with breathwork training, because when not just one or two of these things, when all of these things come together, that's when you get results like this. These are real photos of the hundreds of athletes that have done breathwork training. They've addressed the missing piece, and they've climbed the highest mountains in the world by doing so. So this is the bulk of our presentation, but I do want to show you, if you have interest, the full system that I said that I ended up creating, right? So my question for you is, you could either drop off here. You've gotten a lot out of this presentation. You've done some assessments. You can go ahead and bow out now. That's all good. But if you want to stick around, maybe just throw a yes in the chat if you want to actually see the full system here in action. I'd be happy to show that with you now. Again, it is the system that I introduced to Umer. It's the system that Dave ended up training with. It's the system that Nigel trained with. It is a paid system, but I'd be happy to show you how all of that works if you want to. I'm seeing some yeses in the chat. Angela, Joe, Michael, yes, yes, yes. Okay. So let's actually jump into the system then, shall we? And again, for those that are dipping out, all good. Thanks for joining. Really appreciate it. So you remember when I said that those hacks, they're just hacking together different protocols and exercises, aren't going to be what ends up making a difference on the mountain? It required a system. So I'm thrilled, and even just recently launched this. The latest and greatest Summit Ready system is what we call it, because this is the framework that changed everything for the climbers that have addressed the missing piece. We call it the Summit framework. So Summit, yes, cute, cliche, whatever. I'll take the critiques. It's fine. It actually is an acronym, right? It's called the Summit framework. What you start with is survey. We need to survey where you're at today with your own breathing. Once we can survey where you're at today, we can then know what pieces of your breathing habits that we need to unlearn. And then once we can unlearn those pieces of bad habits, we can then integrate proper breathing habits into all of your training, all of your everyday breathing. And if we can integrate that, then that's going to create more performance in less time. And so this integration cycle starts from there. The first M in Summit stands for muscle training. This is where we want to train those respiratory muscles to be able to handle that breathing at high altitude, where the air pressure is lower. Those muscles are going to be taxed more at altitude. So that first M stands for muscle training. And then obviously we're going to integrate stronger muscles into everything that we do. We're going to get more performance in less time. That second M in Summit is the final phase, really, of the training, the last, say, 4 weeks or so. And that is mountain simulation protocols. This is where we do the hypoxic simulation protocols, where we make some key hypoxic-related adaptations in the body as we prepare to go start the acclimatization process. We can do some of that at home using these high-altitude simulation protocols. This is also where we do the carbon dioxide tolerance training protocols and everything to help us feel less out of breath. So with those superpowers under our belt, we obviously are going to integrate that into everything. And then finally, we end up here at T. T stands for test, taper off the hard exercises, retest the same assessments we did at the beginning, and then trust. Trust that you've done enough preparation before your climb. And ultimately, we want to be dancing on the summit like that little stick figure person here at the top, right? This is the framework that we go through in our Summit Ready system. But every framework still needs a system to go around it. And that's where we created things like what's included in our overall system is an online video course so that you can access these training videos wherever, whenever, according to your own schedule. What's also included in our Summit Ready system is a workbook so that you can actually document when you do these exercises and track your progress. We also integrate everything inside Training Peaks, which is an app that a lot of people use before an expedition. And I do recommend using Training Peaks as well. What's included also is this training timeline calculator, something where you simply put in the date of your expedition, and then it's going to spit out exactly what plan you need to follow based on your specific time frame that you have in advance of your climb. What's also included in the Summit Ready system is that guy's ugly face going to be on video with you constantly. We call that our coach on call access. So either me or one of our other coaches on staff, we're going to be in touch with you so that you can get help anytime that you need it. We have a bunch of guides and toolkits so that you can have the most important information that you need in advance of your climb to help you along the way, including something called the Summit Readiness Assessment, and so that you have all that information available to you when you need it. What's also included in this Summit Ready system is the accountability check-ins and checkpoints that you need to make throughout the online video course so that you can stay on track and actually finish the training program. I also go live every single week so that you can have an anchor, a training anchor every week and be guided through a session. We also have everything housed in one place for you. And you can train alongside a community, meet other people that are training for big expeditions as well. We call this our Basecamp training platform. And in fact, let me tell you just a really quick story about Basecamp. I want to introduce you to Martin and Nathan. Martin is a climber from Czechia, Czech Republic. Nathan lives in Seattle, Washington. Okay, very different parts of the world, but they both signed up for some breathwork training. And when you do that on Basecamp, you establish what your expedition is. In this case, they were both going to attempt to climb Aconcagua. So they got linked up on Basecamp, okay? They got introduced to each other. They ended up going through the training together, checking in on each other, et cetera, et cetera. It was pretty cool because they knew they were going to be at Aconcagua around the same time. Then they went from the virtual Basecamp to actual Basecamp at Aconcagua. And then they ended up climbing the entire mountain together. And this is them at the summit of Aconcagua. Martin and Nathan going from the virtual world of our Basecamp training platform to the real world summit of Aconcagua. Super cool story. I love telling that story. These types of connections are happening all the time on our Basecamp platform. So in this Summit Ready system as a whole, you get that online video course, the training plans, the guides, the toolkits, the coach on call support. You get, in short, a full training system, personalized breathwork training, respiratory muscle training, lung capacity development training, your out of breath training protocols, that high altitude simulation training, as well as the workbook and Training Peaks app, valued at around $900. You get the coaching and the community support with your coach on call, valued at $350. Your altitude readiness and risk reduction toolkits at $500. We also have created the schedule integration framework for busy athletes like yourself. And then we also have the live weekly training sessions. This is valued at $2,150. But on this webinar, on this workshop right now, I'm going to cut that price down. And what I'm going to offer it to you is for $497, or you can start it for just $97 a month for 6 months. You can obviously start it and cancel that at any point in time. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open up right now. I'm going to fire up a button where you can actually book this now. You can actually enroll in the training now. So I'm going to make that offer live if you do want to enroll in the Summit Ready system and address that missing piece. That offer is live right now. Now, there's a couple of pieces to the training that I kind of glossed over with when I was describing what's included in the Summit Ready system. As you saw with the sports mask, we also have another tool called the Buteyko belt. There is some equipment, some actual physical equipment that's required to do a good, proper training. We also have this thing called a playbook, okay? This is called the Expedition Breathing Playbook. Not just breathwork training in advance of the climb, but actually on the mountain itself, we've broken down how should you breathe up there. These two things are valued at $100 for the equipment and then $175 for this expedition breathing playbook, something that's critically important for those that are climbing. But instead of spending $275 on those things individually, if you enroll in the Summit Ready system within the next 5 days, I am going to include that equipment bundle and the playbook for free. So you're effectively getting $275 off of that purchase. So ultimately, what you end up getting is Summit Ready system as a whole. You get the Expedition Breathing Playbook, how to breathe up there. And then you can get this equipment bundle, all of that valued at $2,425. You get that for just $497 or $97 a month for 6 months. Again, I did make that live right now in the video player that you are watching this at the moment. Let's break down what exactly a total expedition investment costs here, my friends. We have an expensive hobby, I know. I can kind of break down the cost in this lower range, middle range, higher end. But let's just take, for example, that mid-range for your actual trip. $14,000 is kind of like guides plus expedition, travel and logistics, gear, training, pre-acclimatization sort of stuff, $14,000. $497 is just 3% of the total cost of that investment in your expedition. But if you remember from Aconcagua example, we jumped from 35% to 71% success rate in the last 2 climbing seasons. So to spend what is 3% of your total cost, you're going to get the output of a 36% success rate jump at Aconcagua. I look at that like putting some insurance on your investment. And as additional insurance to you, I'm offering a 30-day money-back unconditional guarantee. Now, I know that this training works because it has worked for hundreds of climbers, experienced or not, that have come through and done this training. I know it works, but if for some reason it doesn't, within 30 days, you can cancel it, money back, guarantee, etc. No issues. The last thing that I want to offer you is that because you're joining me live on this workshop, if you enroll live right now, I'm not talking in 5 days, but I'm talking literally right this second, basically right this second, in the next like 20 minutes or so. If you enroll now, I will offer you a one-on-one complimentary training session with me included in your purchase. So again, that offer is live now for you to go ahead and book if you want to. To recap everything, you get this whole system, you get those, the bonuses included, you get the free one-on-one training session with me, valued at $2,725, all of that for just $497. So I want to leave you with one last message here. Again, I really want you to not waste your time investing in what doesn't matter in advance of your trip. Invest in what actually matters. Yes, do your aerobic training, your strength training, your muscular endurance training, but address this missing piece. Because again, when all of these things come together, that is when you get the results that you're looking for. Join the hundreds of climbers around the world that have climbed the highest mountains in the world by including breathwork training in their preparation. So I encourage you, your next step, enroll now and reach your summit. So I'm going to open things up now to Q&A. I'm looking at the chat now. I already have received some questions, which is really great. I see a question in here. I have just 10 days. Oh shit, what should I do? I know that's not quote unquote what you said, Angela, but yes, 10 days. Here's some recommendations. The quickest thing that you can do in the next 10 days is to take the Recal breath assessment. I'm going to drop that link in the chat right now. Assessment.recal.training. Go to that, and that's going to give you an idea on where your breathing is at right now, okay? Once you know where your breathing is at today, that's the quickest way for you to then try to address the bad breathing habits that you have. And in 10 days, you can actually make some changes in those breathing habits. So that would be the quickest and best thing, I think, for you to do, Angela, in just your 10 days, okay? And obviously, you could do other parts of the training. We could talk about that offline, but that's really the quickest thing to do. And once I see your assessment come through, I can actually address a few specific things with you. James, great train for the training approach. Thank you so much. Can you also comment on any on mountain coping techniques? This is where that expedition breathing playbook comes in. Changes to your respiratory rate, pressure breathing, etc. during climbs when breathing gets harder. Good question, James. I love that question. Again, this is why we literally built the entire expedition breathing playbook. So quickly, I'll give you just a couple of examples. You mentioned pressure breathing. That is a very good protocol to use at times when you're on the mountain. For those of you that don't know what pressure breathing is, what it is you are effectively exhaling with pursed lips like you're blowing out a straw. You're going to elongate the exhale and you're going to keep more pressure, which is where the name pressure breathing comes from. You're going to keep more pressure in your intrathoracic cavity here, inside your lungs. If you have higher pressure inside your lungs, it's going to get more oxygen diffused into the bloodstream. So now that hopefully I didn't confuse anybody with a little bit of background on pressure breathing, I absolutely recommend that, James. But the most important thing for those people that are going to do pressure breathing on the mountain is I want you to go in with well-trained expiratory muscles, the muscles that you use when you exhale. Because I've seen what happens oftentimes is people get into pressure breathing and it takes a ton of energy out of their body. In fact, oftentimes their expiratory muscles, primarily your abdomen and your inner intercostal muscles, the muscles in your rib cage right here, they end up fatiguing. And what happens is then you pull from these auxiliary muscles that aren't supposed to do your breathing, and then you have eventually slow down. You're kind of like your economy of movement, how much energy you're expending, increases for no reason other than you're trying to breathe. So my challenge to you would be to train your expiratory muscles, which is a part of our training. We train both the inspiratory and expiratory muscles in our breathwork training. So I highly do recommend that. The second thing that I'll mention, James, is a really quick protocol that I use to catch my breath. Okay. It's something called the physiological sigh. What it is a double inhale through the nose and then an exhale through the mouth. It looks and sounds, I think I just changed my microphone. You should probably be able to hear this better. It looks and sounds something like this. So if you notice, I did that pretty normal inhale through my nose, a quick pause, and then a jolt of air through the nose, and then an exhale through my mouth. This is the single fastest way for you to catch your breath if you're feeling out of breath, right? It's the quickest way for us to offload carbon dioxide so that we can regain control of our breathing. I recommend you doing that 2, 3, maybe 4 times in a row, but no more than that because you can actually get pretty lightheaded if you do a lot of that in a row. And that is one of those protocols that I end up using on the mountain more than any other. So there's a little tip for you there. I hope that helps. James, I mean, we have a whole book on this. So there's a lot of other things that I would recommend. But for now on our call, those are the 2 things that I would recommend right out of the gate. Jana, I know that you had a question for me. I wrote it down earlier. Let me just pull that up. I think you had said, will this training benefit me even if I'm not doing an Everest big type of expedition? The answer is simply absolutely. I mean, this breathwork training thing, it benefits you if you're running a marathon at sea level, like I did in my first marathon. It helped me, in my 14ers in Colorado. It helped me. It did help me at Orizaba, at 5,000 meters. But yes, obviously, if you're climbing something like Everest, we would want a nice structured long-term plan. But absolutely, it's going to help you whether you're at sea level or up at high altitude. It just happens to be that I focus on training high altitude expedition type of clients. I also got a question earlier. I forget who asked this, which was about Diamox. Diamox, For those of you that aren't familiar with it, it's a pill, prescription drug, I believe, that it'll increase your breathing, your respiratory rate, right? So when I mentioned that ventilatory response at high altitude, it is going to help keep your SpO2 higher. But there are some side effects to Diamox. I won't get all into it. And again, it's a tricky thing for me to comment. Always consult your doctor when it comes to Diamox and whatnot. So I'm not here to say do Diamox or don't do Diamox. But I will say that anything that's going to artificially increase your breathing is going to tax your respiratory muscles potentially more than what you're ready for. So, doing the breathwork training in advance of going at high altitude and taking Diamox is going to be extremely beneficial so that you don't fatigue these muscles. And if you fatigue the muscles at high altitude, you're going to then start pulling from muscles that shouldn't be doing your breathing. Again, going into that less economy of energy expenditure. Hey, everybody, for those of you that hung out with me. All right, I'm back. Sorry, my internet dropped, and so I pulled off my hotspot. Michael, you had asked the question, what is the best time interval for the training? The best is basically starting today, no matter where you're at with your training. We could be a year out from something. And the point is, if you can address your bad breathing habits and start to train your breathing in a proper way, you're going to get more out of everything that you're doing between now and when you actually train. For example, it took me about 9 months for me to be able to train properly breathing through my nose in order to then go run the marathon with my mouth taped shut. Breathing through your nose, by the way, is an extremely, I cannot emphasize this more enough. If you were to take one thing away from this presentation, is that please, everybody, start breathing through your nose more often. It is the organ that's designed to do your breathing. But that point aside, it took me like 9 months to really adapt to being able to breathe through my nose very well. So, generally speaking, I want people in as early as humanly possible. Oh my gosh. Whoops. I keep dropping. I'm sorry, everybody. But obviously, it can be challenging for somebody to train for 1 year, even. So, it's oftentimes that I see people getting into this 3 to 4 months in advance of their expedition. But the bare minimum is really a 5 week time frame. So, Michael, if you're still there, the bare minimum would be 5 weeks. That's kind of like the cutoff between really having a good, proper training under your belt before your expedition. But in terms of early, start it today, kind of thing. Like, when was the best day to plant a tree? Well, the best day was 30 years ago, but the second best day is today, kind of thing, right? Plant a tree, everybody, on your breathing. Plant the seeds, I should say, on good breathing, and you will reap the benefits of what the seed that you sowed at a later date. I really tried hard for that one. All right, I think that's all the questions that I got. I think I addressed it. Ooh, there might have been one earlier. I've been turned around in Orizaba, high winds 10 years ago, planning to go back this winter. Nice, James. All right. I think that's it. And Lauren, I addressed your question on Diamox. So that's it, everybody. I guess we will wrap up now. Thanks so much for joining. I'm going to be hosting a very special event in August. Maybe I'll send you an email on that. It's with somebody who climbed Everest after doing breathwork training, and we're going to call that. What are we going to call it? We're calling breathing our way to the top of the world. A very, very special human being from the United States. Actually, I believe lives in Montana. Oh no, excuse me, Idaho. She climbed Everest this past year after doing the breathwork training. So we're going to cover what her experience was like around that. So maybe have a heads up, just promoting that in August. Other than that, be safe out there, everybody. Breathe well, climb hard, and all those things. I'm here. If you have any questions, you can reach out to me very simply at this address that you see right here in the top right, Anthony@recaltraining.com. And otherwise, everybody, take care. I'll see you soon. Bye now.